I think blessing is not that such a simple thing, right? Like it's not just a marriage. That's very important to be aware of, right? So even though maybe for you as a young person thinking about blessing, probably the thing that you're thinking most about is who will your spouse be and how will it be and so on, creating a relationship and finding that person and right? That's probably like a kind of what's most on our mind. But I think it's important to be aware that actually blessing it's not about you and your spouse first of all at all, right? It becomes that, but it's first of all it's actually about your relationship to God, and that's quite important to be aware of. And as we go through content today and tomorrow, maybe in the back of your mind you can keep that in mind, that your decision to go to the blessing and to the blessing is not just about you. You're blessed children, so your parents went to the blessing, right? The blessing is connected to who you are, to your lineage, to where you come from, to your family tradition, right? You're already the result of the blessing. You're not just another person going into the blessing. You're already a result of a blessing providence, and that originated within our true parents, right? So it's very important and helpful for us to have a kind of a more deeper insight into what the blessing actually is, right? More than just a marriage, not just the marriage aspect, the thing that feels for you like this is your challenge or the thing you're working on, but to be aware of more the wider, the history, the meaning of the blessing, and to be aware that this is actually about but not just as in me as an individual, but our, as human beings, our relationship to God, right? Rectifying something there that has that we all struggle with until today, that all mankind struggles with, and God is working to restore His relationship to us as His children, as human beings, and we are one of them, right? And you are very specific, one of them, a blessed child born in whatever year here in Europe, or in Australia, or America, or Hong Kong. So our specific situation, I kind of to step a bit out of my specific situation and kind of, first of all, try to get more an overview about the blessing itself, what it is, its meaning, and hopefully to have, through having a deeper understanding, being able to make better and deeper choices in this field, and that it has more meaning for you, right? And that you can also recognize how this is important in your spiritual life. I think you're all here because you are serious about your spiritual life, at least you're reflecting about it and want to make good decisions. You want to have God in your life. You want to build happy, ideal families, right? I'm assuming that that's everyone's wish to some degree. So I think it's just helpful to have some more deeper insights into what the blessing is, where it comes from, and then based on that to see how can I invest myself in the right way or make the right steps, the right decisions to move forward here, to allow God to guide me in this area. So it's first of all about my relationship to God. If I say blessing is about our relationship to God, right, then first of all, what kind of relationship is it that we have as human beings with God? Just from basic DP understanding. You all heard basic DP lectures, right? So things like growth stages or four-position foundation or foundation of faith, foundation of substance, I don't need to explain, right? I can just assume that everyone has a basic understanding. So based on DP, what is our relationship as human beings to God? How would we describe it? Parent-child, right? So God is our creator, and He created us not just like robots, but as His children, right? So it's a certain type of relationship that reflects certain artistic qualities, right? Like love and care and full investment into the child, and hoping that the child will grow and mature well, right? And which includes freedom and these things. But also it's a lineage relationship, right? It's not we are not just a creation of God, but God put His heart into us, right? Like the essence of who God is in us as His children, right? So just like parents, when you have children, right? Your children are your own DNA, right? They look like you, but also you pass on a lot of your hearts, your aspirations, your wishes, right? And your accomplishments. Children inherit a lot from the parents, right? And so God also hoped for us as His children to inherit His heart, His understanding, and it's a lineage relationship. It's very close. It's more than just a brother-sister relationship or a relationship between friends. It's very close, right? And like we're one flesh and blood, and we are connected, right? So if we suffer for God, God suffers more, right? Because it's not just a distant, it's not a work colleague, right? We're not a work colleague that sometimes every day we do a prayer condition for a few minutes, so a few days we meet with God and we tell him, and the rest of the day we live our own life. It's much closer than that, right? It's a lineage relationship. And God wanted to really be involved in our life, right? He wanted to be part of our life. He wanted us to experience love and right? The deepest desires he had in his heart, he wanted to share with us and experience, right? As his children, he wanted us to grow and mature and to become parents ourselves, to be able to have the same artistic level of understanding. So the family and the marriage and stuff it's part of God's deepest wish and hope to fulfill his dream, right? Of having children who mature and who experience the deepest kind of love and become parents themselves, become autonomous and free individuals, and as couples to reflect that love deeper and so on. And God wanted to be part of that in our life, in our affairs. He wanted to experience joy and happiness with us in our marriages, in our families, in our relationships, also beyond our families, in our communities, right? So I guess the question is, how can we allow God to be part in our affairs as human beings, right? And of course, the most intimate and most sensitive part is our family, our lineage, right? And that's where we wanted to include God. So it's important to be aware of this lineage aspect. And lineage is something that's not always so easy to understand, and I hope through the explanations it'll become more clear, right? It's a very particular kind of relationship we have with God. It's a very deep and intimate, and we want God to be present there, right? Father explains a lot about, for example, how important the sexual relationship is, right? Because it's a very intimate relationship between man and woman, where man and woman become one, but also where those things that are most relevant to God can be fulfilled, which is love, life, and lineage, right? Life is created in the sexual relationship, but also lineage, right? We pass on through the sexual relationship, through our children, right? We pass on our DNA in an external sense, but also our deepest hearts and desires in the same way God wants to be present in that act, right? And we know through the fall that that's where it got messed up, right? We'll look at that a little bit. Of course, the goal is to build a happy marriage, right? But it should start with, it's about my relationship to God, right? How I can, in that relationship, create a good foundation. So first blessing for second blessing, right? So how to build that good foundation and how that relationship expresses itself, because that's a vertical relationship to God, how it expresses itself horizontally in my marriage, right? And we'll need that relationship to God to create a very healthy and deep, loving relationship, right? Just simply overcoming self-centeredness in my marriage, just thinking about how the other person makes me happy is not a good foundation for a good marriage, right? But our vertical perspective, our capacity to love God, to see our spouse from God's perspective, this is the defining line, right, between our original mind and fallen mind, right? Seeing God's perspective, first fallen nature, losing that is where we deviate from God and where God starts to move aside, right? Where we lose sight of God. So also in our marriage, it's not just about our relationship, but the starting point is our relationship to God, and that should express itself in our marriage, right? If we do that well, if we do that right, if we find a way that God is really in our hearts and included in our decisions and supporting us, if we allow Him to guide us, and if we are willing to overcome our self-centeredness, put God first and so on, these things will allow the love in the marriage and beyond, right, to our children and beyond, for God to be present there, right? And it's beautiful to see, a marriage that lasts many, many years, right? An old couple after many years of marriage that truly love each other. It's something that I hope you'll be able to appreciate at the end of your life when you look back, right? It's something you have to build for. It's not something that just comes. It's not just an inspiration, right? It's something that you need to build over through your life. So it's important to have the deep roots and a good foundation, and to have a good understanding about our relationship to God. I would say there are two aspects of the blessing that it is important to understand, to be aware about, to reflect about, and to somehow also maybe keep in mind as two separate aspects of the blessing, right? So the first is, the blessing is obviously about God's ideal, right? When you study DP, chapter 1, God, male, female, right? Then 3 blessings and individual perfection, right? And then family, 4 great realms of love, 3 great kingships, and all these things. It's about the marriage and creating an ideal family. And so blessing is about making a very important and significant step for you personally in that process, and that is to commit to your spouse and to decide in front of God, to receive the blessing from God for your marriage, and to build a family centered on true love, centered on, right, like in the family pledge. That is one part of the blessing, and it's definitely the most important aspect of the blessing. It's God's original ideal. And the reason this is the most important is because this is what God's intention was, right? At creation, and the blessing that He wanted to give us was for that sake. And this is eternal and absolute, unchanging. True love is eternal, absolute, unique, and unchanging, right? And so this aspect of the blessing is on one hand the most central aspect, and I hope it's for you also the most motivating one, that you personally feel, I want to create a happy, loving family. I want to create a space where God and me and my spouse are one, right? And where we can experience God's love. And I hope when you think about going to the blessing stuff, that you keep that in mind, and that motivates you to make the right steps in the blessing. So first of all, it should be about God's ideal. But there is another part of the blessing that it's very important for us to understand, and most of what I will be sharing about today is probably more connected to the other part of the blessing, and that is that blessing is also about restoration, right? Blessing is not just about God's ideal, it has a lot to do with restoration. And this aspect is not eternal, unique, absolute, and unchanging. Restoration, once it's completed, is finished, right? It wasn't part of God's plan for Adam and Eve that they do holy wine ceremony and stick ceremony and all these things in their blessing. That wasn't part of God's plan, right? God wanted to give them the blessing and have a happy marriage, and just wanted to give them everything that make it wonderful and beautiful and loving, right? That was God's original plan. But because of the fall and because of the problems that we have in our relationship to God since the fall, it's not that simple, right? That's what I'll explain today. And the blessing is, let's say, the method that Father as the Messiah, our true parents who have come in this age, right, through the history of restoration, and that's what we'll look at this morning, have brought to us as a means of resolving the issue of the fall in our relationship, of making a change in our lineage, of rectifying something there, and creating a new starting point in our lineage relationship to God, in order to go through restoration, to cut off all that is evil, and eventually come back to the ideal. And this is not just a magical ceremony, like, your parents took this cup of holy wine, now it's solved, finished. It's as long as we are still not mature and are still struggling with fallen nature, and I'm sure you're aware that you also struggle with self-centeredness and with fallen nature, right? It's important for us to be aware of this aspect, to respect that aspect, to build on the foundation that was built, and in my blessing also to be aware. I want to continue carrying that burden until it's finished, right? I want to support God in restoring my relationship with God completely, and with my spouse, in my marriage, and later with my children, and so on in the next generation, right? That we will eventually get to the point that blessing can really be only about God's ideal, right? So it's important to understand the aspect of restoration more deeply, and to reflect also how that affects me personally, because there are challenges we will face in going to the blessing and in building a marriage together, building a family that are related to that. And I think a deeper principled understanding is helpful, right? To do a better job at that, right? So please be aware, blessing is also about restoration, right? So you guys are all blessed children, so most of your parents were blessed, and probably most of your parents were also matched by true father, right? Whose parents were matched by true father? Okay. It looks to me like 95%. Maybe some of your parents are previously married couple, right? They were already married when they joined, but it's possible. But most of you were matched by a true father. So most of you are probably also an international or mixed race, right? Your parents are not from the same country, right? My parents are from Germany and Austria. Doesn't sound so different, but if you know Austrians, then it's not such an easy relationship. And a lot of you here are probably half Japanese or half whatever, right? So, so you're probably aware that, for Father, this was part of restoration, right? To bring mankind together, to overcome differences between countries and races and so on, right? To match them together. You aware of that? Right? That's also one of Father's motivation to match, to help us to overcome that. So Jesus said, you should love your enemy, right? You heard that quote, love your enemy. And Father took that one step further. What did he say? He said, marry your enemy and create ideal families. The second part is also important. Not just marry them and somehow endure, but create loving and ideal families. Why? Because through love, that's the way we can overcome these differences. An enemy, I would say, enemy is actually just a concept that we create in our mind to allow us not to love someone completely, right? Yeah, getting deeper. So if you think the French or the Japanese or whatever are your enemy, that's a concept you have, and it justifies you not to love, even to hate them, right? That concept doesn't exist in God, right? When it comes to human beings, God does not have that concept. So if we want to be like our Father in heaven, as Jesus would say, right, it's important that we are able to love our enemy, because if we love them, they're not our enemy. If you love someone, by definition, they're not your enemy. Enemy is just a concept Satan creates to divide us and to allow us to excuse ourselves from loving someone. But we should always be able to love our brothers and sisters, right? We should be able to love our parents. We should be able to love God. So the concept of enemyship doesn't exist in God, right? So Father is very specifically by matching people from different nations and different countries, for example, Japanese, Korean, right? The enemy in the history, it's still, if you've ever been to Korea or Japan, even today, they have heavy concepts about each other. They don't like each other, right? More than the Germans and the Austrians don't like each other. So by matching them together, right, it's that the children will not have that concept, right? Like mom's dad, Japanese, dad's Korean. How can I hate Koreans even if I live in Japan and everyone tells me Koreans are bad? But right? So that's an obvious part of restoration, that Father was using the blessing for restorational purpose, right? To overcome these differences, and that is sometimes more challenging than we think, right? So it's important for us to be aware this is also part of the blessing, right? How can we become like God? How can we become more God-like, more loving people? And it's by loving someone where it's more difficult to love, we need to make more effort. That's one obvious way to grow our heart and to become more loving and to help mankind overcome the differences we have in human history, right? So blessing is also about restoration from various different aspects. So you can count on your struggles in your personal life, in your self-centeredness, your shortcomings, your fallen natures, right? We've heard of them. You will face them, and you should face them also in your blessing and marriage, and through the love of your spouse, through creating a loving relationship, you can heal, you can grow, and you can become a bigger, loving person, right? So it's part of also your growth process of becoming perfect.